rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you found us on the radio, maybe you're listening to us online, regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, and click subscribe. Better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30, 40, maybe 50 plus years, building a nest egg, then shutting it off without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement happiness. Society tells us that retirement is the time when we can truly live and be happy. But does retirement make good on that promise? And furthermore, what makes us happy in the first place? Today, we cover wealth transfer plans. Unlike wills, wealth transfer plans distribute wealth to heirs and charities while the giver is still living. This allows retirees to not only see the fruits of their labor, but helps prepare the next steward. In this podcast, Ben explains how wealth transfer plans can be a way to break the bondage of a money disorder and unlock the keys to truly leaving a legacy. Enjoy this episode. Hey folks, and welcome back to the show. We're so glad that you are joining us here on Retire Repurposed. We've got a great show today. We are going to continue this series on retirement happiness, and we're going to talk about something specific here, having a little bit more to do with the financial side of retirement, and we're going to cover the ins and outs of a wealth transfer plan. And this is a really, really great concept, and is going to be a great show for you folks listening, so we are so glad that you are here. Just a quick reminder, before we get started with the show here today, we have a Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for more tips on living repurposed, all the data, everything we talk about on the show. If there's something specific we talk about on this show and we want to show it to you or give you a link, we will give it to you in that Facebook group. So again, go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join this growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Well, we started this series about 5 episodes ago. We just talked about the ins and outs on what is retirement happiness. We looked at a biblical view of kind of answering that question. We talked about what is the best age. We talked about, again, can even money buy happiness? And we discussed how, sometimes it's not just about how much money we make, but really how money helps us kind of get through the day-to-day necessities. And there is certainly a correlation to that. And then we talked about resolving the money disorder last week. And this has been a really interesting topic that we've talked more and more about here over the last year or so. By the way, this was the most downloaded podcast we have had in a long time. So again, if you miss any of these shows, I say it every single show, go back on iTunes, make sure you subscribe, but listen to some of these podcasts because we're taking a deep dive on kind of what makes retirees tick in many different facets of life. We're down this little rabbit hole now on the financial, but this idea of the money disorder is a really important concept that we have to talk about. So I do want to make a little review here on this before we get started with today's show on wealth transfer. Ben Tages joins me on the show. And again, I think the money disorder is probably a term that I haven't heard a lot of. I'm not saying we invented it, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. What does it really mean, and what are the dangers of it?
Yeah, Jared, I think, well, first of all, we didn't talk about this last week, but as I continue to talk to people more about this money disorder, what is the word disorder? What does that mean? And really, it means a state of confusion. If you look it up, it's something that is abnormal. And the reason I like how we've used the word disorder is because we realize that the folks we're talking to that may be feeling this disorder, this money disorder, it is confusion because the reality of it is that they do have enough. They do have plenty of income. They do have all their needs met. Again, we're not talking to somebody who again, and there are people out there listening that are struggling day to day and trying to figure out, how will I make it? I don't want to be tone deaf again to them. And if you're listening, there's hope and there's certainly help. But I think what we're talking to is people that we know, we see that it is a state of confusion. And that what that disorder means is, there is you're feeling that way and you shouldn't. Yeah. So I think let's be clear on that. And I think how do we resolve it? Well, it starts, like we talked about last week, it starts with really understanding that if you are not content, it is impossible to be free and to feel as if you don't struggle with the way you look at money.
Yeah, I think that this kind of caught me off guard. Again, I joined this business back about 9 years ago, and this would be something that I would not have seen. This kind of threw a curveball at me. But again, recapping a little bit some of the things we mentioned last week. Having people that have enough, they've saved enough, you could almost argue have worked almost too long and too hard in some instances, and then they reach retirement where now they're able to spend it and kind of enjoy, quote unquote, the fruits of their labor. They can't do it. They're kind of in almost like a psychological or mental bondage state with their money where they focus too much on it. Heaven forbid it goes down because of a daily or weekly market drop, and they're basically a slave mentally to their money, and their mood fluctuates. That's kind of what we're talking about. And again, to kind of reiterate what you said, this is running out of money is bad. Don't get me wrong. That would not be a great scenario for retirement for our life. That's not what we're suggesting. But having your mood and your mental health tied to your money, boy, that's another level of bondage.
It is, Jared. And I think part of the reason I love talking about this is it's something that I struggle with too. I think if you look at most Americans today, we do struggle with this. Again, the media is constantly, the advertisements are telling us we need more, we need different, we need better. And this is not an easy thing. So again, like we were talking about last week, this was a learned concept, even for Paul, right? There's a guy sitting in a jail cell that says, I've learned to be content. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. And too many of us think it will be easy. I'm just going to be content. It's not easy. You know where it starts? Like we talked about last week, it starts with giving. And I believe that. It starts with having a heart that is open to giving, even when things aren't going well. And I think that's, I'll share with you. Again, I struggle with this. So guess last week, a week and a half ago, I guess, when we were first going through this, the markets were in some turmoil. My wife and I don't say this to brag, but just to be clear on how we struggle with this too, we donated stock. I thought, this is a time to do that. This is a time to make a contribution to our donor advised fund. And yes, everything was not going as well as it should have. Well, this is a time that you think, maybe we need to exercise what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It felt very freeing. Yep. It felt very freeing to say, okay, this particular stock was up in value and it made sense, and it was a time to do it. So again, it started with giving. And then the second piece, like we talked about before, is gratitude. So it's a mindset shift from what I don't have to what I do have. Yeah. And once you have that piece combined with not holding on tightly to your money and being able to say, others might need it more than I do, and you're able to break free from that. That's the 1-2 punch of really overcoming that money disorder.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I struggle with the same thing. There was one time we were talking about this several months ago, and it was about the time that I was stockpiling wood to burn. As you know, Ben, like I burn wood in our home to heat it, which is kind of that's a whole nother podcast and topic. But I stockpiled all this wood over last winter and summer. And then all of a sudden it got to the point where I needed to use it this last winter. And there was one time where my son was like, hey, I need to go get some wood. Which pile should I pull it off of? And he goes, should I go pull it off of that pile? And I was like, well, don't take it off that pile. Like that pile's all nice. It's all nice and cozy. It's perfect, and we do that with our money where it's like, it's there. It's not really doing anything other than sitting there, but we don't want to touch it too much. And again, in a very parallel sense, I think that is kind of a scarcity mindset wrapped up into something different than money.
Yeah, what a great analogy, Jared. And I agree. I think if you're looking at that as if you're trying to hold on to that, right? And you're trying to look at that to me became your wealth. That became your, like, that's that stockpile that's there, not to be touched, right? And it's like, well, why not?
Right.
I'd ask you, why would you not pull logs off that perfectly good wood pile to burn? Because that burning of those logs, that becomes your income. That becomes your heat of keeping your house warm. And it's the useful side of that log pile, because it did you no good just piled up. In fact, it might be ugly to look at because there's a pile of wood there. Well, really, when you take it and you burn it and you use it, that's your income. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if you missed this show on the money disorder, go back. It was just last week. That's a really important show, and just a must-have concept that you have to understand, really, if you're a retiree or anybody, because we can kind of get into this fear-based scarcity mindset, whether it's money, whether it's firewood, whether it's a thing, whatever it is. Again, we have to abolish this disorder in our mind, especially when it comes to our wealth. So that segues really nicely into today's show. Again, we're going to talk about wealth transfer. And again, I would consider this idea of wealth transfer, which we'll dissect deeply here in the next 15 to 20 minutes. But really, this is another, I would say, maybe antidote. Again, Ben, you talked about how, being content, having gratitude, giving, understanding wealth versus income, which we talked about last week. But this idea of a wealth transfer plan can almost be yet another solution to resolve this idea of the money disorder.
Yeah, it is. And I think, it really starts, Jared, with saying, this wealth that I'm holding onto so tightly, whose is it? Right. And the true answer, if you're a believer, is you can say very easily, like, well, I am stewarding this wealth for God. Ultimately, everything I've been giving is His, right? And I am just simply stewarding. I can say that, Jared, and I can talk about that with clients, but I think we need like the nuts and bolts behind what that means, right? And if you think through really this wealth transfer plan and what you're trying to do, I think it helps you look at your wealth and what you have more of that. Some of it's not yours literally. Like literally you'll never use it. Right. And that's where this wealth transfer comes in.
I think that this really applies to those people, again, who have enough. They've worked hard. They've got the storehouse of wealth. And it's going to kind of free them. And again, we talk about this idea of the money disorder almost is it's a bondage that we're in. We want to release you from that bondage. This is one way to do it. And it's going to release you to spend it and or give it away. You always talk about the shark fin, Ben. Explain to people what that means.
Yeah, Jared. So if you can, and you're listening, picture with me a shark fin, right? So it goes up one side and down the other. And really that's a graph of what I think most people should look like when they're saving for retirement. And you look at your wealth, and that's really what it looks like. Like you build it up over time, and you're saving, you're putting money away, just like people say you should in our business. And you put money away, and all of a sudden it peaks out, and then it begins to go down the other side. If your intention is to save money for someday to spend in retirement, it should resemble that shape.
Right. So again, as you're saving for retirement, it's kind of a slow. Really, it's a reverse shark fin. Actually, am I right on that? So it kind of slowly goes up, and then as you approach retirement, it starts to go up a little bit more exponentially because you're building more wealth. Correct. It peaks out at retirement, and then there's kind of this slow fade off the front side of the shark fin. Am I hitting that correctly?
Well, you are. I think that's how it should look. Right. You saved your money so that way you can then spend it down the other side. Yeah. What we see though, Jared, is instead of it looking like a shark fin for most people who again are struggling with this money disorder idea, is that they save their money and they save it and then it just plateaus. It stays up there. And they say, well, now I'm only going to live on the interest. I'm only going to live on the income. And that can be okay if your goal is, again, to then die someday and give all of your wealth, what you have, to either a charity or your children all at once. Then it should look like that if that's your goal. And some people, that's their goal. They're like, yep, I'm only going to live on the interest. I want a stockpile out there. But I can tell you from working with people over, again, 20 years, that sometimes, many times that does, that idea where you save it and then you keep it and hold on to it, it can start to look like it's yours. And you're holding on to it until the last possible moment, which of course we know is death.
Well, I bet you those would be the people that would struggle, that come into the office, they're checking their account balances, they see that the market has dropped, it dropped below some proverbial number or level of wealth, their mind is attached to that, their mood is attached to that, and they can never handle that number going down, when again, in many cases, we believe that should actually start to deaccumulate. And again, it goes back to this idea of a money disorder. Even my wood pile, again, I built it to use it. Now I'm in the time where I should be using it, and now I can't. And that's where we kind of go awry here on this deal.
Yeah, and you're thinking, can I run out? Will I use too much of that wood? Okay, and that's where a wealth transfer plan comes in, having a steady, here is what we need. So if you could budget, here's the exact amount of what I need. And by the way, I think every retiree should have a budget, Jared. Every retiree should look at life as if, okay, I have a budget. And retirees look at me many times like, well, I used to have a budget when I needed to save. Now you need a budget to show you what you need to spend, because that way here's how long my money can last. Then I can begin to create the downside, the backside of this wealth transfer plan, which shows me eventually using all of the wealth that I've saved.
I can almost hear people listening right now, and they're formulating a question or a rebuttal in their head. And this is one that we have heard many times as well. But the question is, well, what about the kids? You want me to deaccumulate my wealth. Well, what about the children and the heirs and the charities I want to give to? What do you say to that?
Well, I think it starts with a differentiation of, again, is it your money, and I'm putting that in air quotes, or their money? First of all, none of it's ours. We're stewarding it, remember, from the beginning of the show. But if you can start to look at it as, okay, I have a certain amount of wealth that I'm stewarding. Am I the best steward right now, or should somebody else have it? Okay? Mm-hmm. And then there's a certain amount that I will need because I need, and I think there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, here's the wealth that I plan on spending through, right? Yep. By having a budget, knowing how much I can possibly spend and the lifestyle I want to create. And then after that point, the rest of it really needs a very dedicated plan on transferring that either to a charity or to the children while you're living. Yeah. Okay, here's a difference there. The wealth transfer plan is on death, or is while you're living, and just the old way of doing things is just, I'm going to save it all and keep it until I die.
Yeah, and again, that you made a really important point. I want to reiterate that you have to delineate what is yours, air quotes, and what is theirs. So you don't ever have to worry about spending their money, because you're not spending their money. You're spending your money. I think this is a good time here to talk about too, inheritance versus legacy, because people get these two concepts confused as well.
Yeah, I think it's important here because a wealth transfer plan will allow you to bring greater legacy. Okay, and I notice I didn't say inheritance there. Inheritance we look at, and I define that as that's the money that your kids will spend after you die. Okay, usually and many times not the way that you would like them to. I will say that. You'll spend your money that you've saved better than your kids will. Now, legacy, what that is the lasting impact on people. Okay, and I think one of the best ways to make sure that you're not only from a financial standpoint creating good legacy or inheritance money that they get, but to continue developing your children. And I think if you can combine like trying to create a greater legacy with making sure that the kids get money while you're living, I think that's a great way to do that. It's a great way to teach them how to handle it. And it's a great way, by the way, they probably need it now more than ever.
Yeah, exactly. Again, the biggest difference between a will and a wealth transfer plan, wills are executed upon death, where they just kind of, again, get sums of money or proportions of the money. But wealth transfer plans delineate what is yours versus theirs, and then you start kind of deaccumulating that or passing that along to either heirs or charities while you're still alive. Ben, you've also said, and I hesitate bringing this up because we're going to step on some toes here, but you've said sometimes wills are the most selfish way to give. How do you explain yourself with that one?
Well, I think so. Whether it be your will says a bunch of money goes to charity, or it says a bunch of money goes to your kids, I think you're still being fairly selfish and that you're holding on to it until the last possible moment. If you're able to develop a good, sound plan that shows that you have enough while you're living to do all your main needs, why not enjoy the tax benefits, but also the ability to create the joy of giving while you're living versus it's not much fun when you're dead. Am I right? So again, I think that it is while you're still alive, doing it then versus saying, here's the leftovers. Here's what I had and I held on to, and now you can have it. I would much rather see both for charities and for children, the people doing it while they're living. And by the way, if you want to build legacy, you have to do it while you're living, because you can't teach when you're gone, right? You can't impact those charities and be able to be part of their organization, be part of your children's lives after you're gone.
I've had this conversation with a number of people outside the office, and I have brought this up, and they say, I'll give that money. I'd rather just wait to give that money when I die. And then I say this, and it usually catches them off guard. I say, dead people can't give money. Dead people could just leave it, but they can't give it. And that tends to be caught with a little bit of contention. There's a little bit of rebuttal there, but I think there is some truth in that, where again, just leaving it until I'm done with it versus giving it and helping the next steward, preparing them. That's a much different way to look at this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think you're going off script here. I like it, but I think many times when we give money, and I'll just look at charities and specifically, if we give and it doesn't hurt at all, and it's just a gift, like, yeah, it's out of there's nothing wrong with giving out of overflow. I love that. But sometimes when you give and you don't really feel the hurt, or it's like, man, I had to sacrifice something in order to make that gift. It's a little bit more valuable many times. Yeah. I know that if you've passed, it's a little harder to feel that, right? Like you're saying.
I've heard.
So it's a little bit less of an actual gift.
Yeah.
If you do delineate that in your will, because you are, like you said, unable to do that. And by the way, like I said earlier, the charities and your children can probably use the money sooner rather than later.
Data says that the average age of receiving an inheritance is 61 years old. Well, again, going back to our whole optimization, series that we've done, you could argue that is a suboptimal time to receive an inheritance. By the time you're 61, chances are you're on that up curve on the shark fin, and you probably don't really need the money as much as you could, when you're in your 30s, when it's a more optimal time. Now, I think, again, I'm already getting ahead of people what they're thinking. If I wait 20 years to give an inheritance, my 61-year-old kids are going to get more than what my 35 or 40-year-old kids would give. But I would argue with you that gift, albeit smaller, giving it to your middle-aged kids rather than a 60-year-old kid, again, when you die maybe at 80 or 85, it's going to have more impact at that time. They're building families. They're trying to start careers. They're trying to put kids through college. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, and also, too, you get a chance to watch them use it. And so, again, I'm challenging people's thoughts on this. If you are retired, if you have more than enough, what would it look like if you were to start transferring that wealth now? And what kind of bigger legacy could you have rather than just leaving it until you die?
Yeah, it's so true, Jared. I don't need a study to tell me that, because each and every day, we're meeting with people who are successful, and we never budget in a inheritance someday for them to receive. Okay, so I'm dealing with mainly late 50s and 60s and some 70s. And most of them are like, yeah, I think there might be something there. I'm like, well, that'd be just a bonus on top of this. Nobody, really, and I'm not saying nobody, but most people get to that 65-year-old, and if you haven't lived your life and you're waiting someday to get an inheritance from your parents, and that's in your 60s, right, I'm sorry, you have waited too long, and most people don't enjoy that nearly as much. In fact, what we see is most of them turn around and then give it to their kids.
They don't know
which
what to
I
do
would much rather do, because they
don't even know what to do with it half the time. And again, that gift to a 40-year-old versus a 60-year-old, again, by that time, it's not that they don't appreciate that, but they really don't even know what to do with maybe a large sum of money at that point in their life. We've got about a minute or two left here. Give some people some thought. Again, put yourself into the shoes of somebody listening to this. They're a retiree or close to retire. What are some questions that they should ponder to maybe get them thinking or challenge their thinking on this idea of wealth transfer?
I would start with asking that question of, who do you want to impact so that you can feel like you had a life well lived? Okay, so look at the who. So again, the only way to make sure that you're leaving a legacy from a financial standpoint is to do it sooner rather than later. Okay, to do it while you're living. You are helping prepare the next steward. That's what really legacy looks like, is helping people be prepared to handle that wealth. Another question would be, what is the best or worst possible outcome if your children receive all of the wealth you have next week? Think about that. And I think if you're thinking through that, you think, yeah, what if I go next week and I've created a will or a trust type plan that allows them to get a whole bunch of money all at once? What's the worst outcome? And if the worst outcome versus the best comes to mind in that question, you better start preparing that next steward. There's nothing worse than leaving a bunch of wealth to somebody who's not prepared to steward it. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make today, is again not having a wealth transfer plan that allows them to prepare that next steward.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation on retirement happiness and wealth transfer plans. If you have any questions or concerns or want more information, just visit our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.